Oh, hello. Welcome to TLDR Reviews, care of The Nerd Chat, an Xbox podcast. Are you curious if the Callisto Protocol is worth playing? Well, let's dive in. When you play this game, the first thing you'll notice is that the game is both absolutely gorgeous and the audio design is stellar. There were multiple times where I found myself really wanting to explore, not just to advance the game or find gear, but to enjoy the world that was clearly a labor of love for the artists and level designers. Especially when paired with the game's robust sound design, every environment felt incredibly visceral and often incredibly brutal, yet really everything came together in a way that was also eerily beautiful. As a pro tip for those that want the most immersive experience possible, play this game in the dark with headphones for sure. All this beauty aside, the game isn't without its quirks and challenges. While this game isn't really related to Dead Space at all, there is a clear inspiration taken from it, and considering that one of the co-creators of Dead Space, Glenn Schofield, was the director on this game, it's pretty clear right away that this is a spiritual successor of sorts. That being said, easily one of the most polarizing things for most players thus far is the combat system, which is definitely reminiscent of that of Dead Space, but adds a whole new dodge element that is absolutely crucial to both the gameplay and survival. While definitely not what I expected, I didn't find this new system nearly as offensive as much of the internet did. With the limited guidance provided by the tutorials and a little bit of trial and error, it really didn't take that long to get used to it, and once I got the hang of it, I actually really enjoyed it quite a bit. Plus, having a melee weapon that you couldn't lose or break was a really nice addition in this type of game. As a fan of survival horror games in general, as well as science fiction, I think that the Callisto Protocol really hit it out of the park with regards to building anticipation and delivering a genuine sense of fear as you play. Much like its spiritual predecessor Dead Space, there was a genuine feeling that enemies could be lurking in every room and may attack at any moment, but it was a nice reprieve that wasn't always the case. As I played through, each time I entered a new area or was faced with the choice of which direction to go first, I felt a small burst of excitement with what may be waiting for me, as the environment and story was really built so that anything could happen at any time. As far as the story and characters themselves, I think Josh Duhamel was a great addition to the cast, and each of the animations and cutscenes only added to the already impressive visual and auditory experience. While I admit that the story for my 12 to 13 hour playthrough started a little absurdly, once it was rolling, there was really a pretty solid through line and a couple of very enjoyable twists and turns, and I found myself more invested in the characters than I really thought that I would. I do admit that I wouldn't describe Callisto Protocol as fast-paced, but as someone who wanted to enjoy the experience and go slow, it felt like I never got bored with any particular area or experience. The one exception to this, and my only other objective criticism, is that there wasn't really a huge variety in terms of enemy types. In total, there were only 12 different types of enemies as compared to Dead Space's 17. I must restate that it never really got boring, as there was definitely enough variety in terms of environment, quantity of enemies, and weapons that the combat was fun, but it was disappointing that there wasn't more variety in terms of mini-bosses and bosses. Definitely something to improve upon in the future. Ultimately, I definitely had a lot of fun playing this creepy game, and despite its loose beginning, I found myself satisfied with its story ending. I will admit that not every mechanic of this game was perfect, but I think there was a really solid foundation to work off moving forward, and I think this has a pretty compelling universe. As an added bonus, Striking Distance released a 6-episode companion podcast to this game starring Gwendolyn Christie. It's not something that's required to understand or enjoy the game, but for those interested, it's a very well done, and what I took from that podcast series is that it's clear that the writers and developers at Striking Distance really care about this universe and are invested in its larger story, which I definitely hope continues with some kind of sequel down the road. As for the final question of whether you should pick it up, the Callisto Protocol really depends a little bit on your preferences and budget. As a huge horror and sci-fi fan myself, I rate this game at a 5 out of 5 must play, not because it's a masterpiece, but because it really scratches that survival horror itch, and I love that there's a new AAA IP in this sci-fi horror realm. While it certainly doesn't fully achieve the greatness of its predecessor Dead Space, it still really delivers a gorgeous environment, genuine scares, and a super fun ride that respects your time. If you're not a massive survival horror fan, I'd rate this more at like a 3 out of 5, a good game. For those people, it's something that you can buy when it's on sale or when it's more seasonally appropriate, like during Halloween. I promise, either way, you'll still have a blast, so just make sure you jump in eventually and check out the Callisto Protocol. Feel free to like, subscribe, and share, and for all things gaming, food, and the good old days, make sure you check out The Nerd Chat, an Xbox podcast. New episodes weekly on all podcast services. See you online.